Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Macrosutra. Now, yesterday the budget came out, and right after the budget, Radhika and I brought you the quick highlights from the budget, what we could glean in just a short amount of time. But now Radhika has a longer time period. She's analyzed the budget. She's been able to look at it in a more deeper way. And that's what we're going to discuss in this episode of Macrosutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint. And this is, of course, Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you, Radhika, for joining us once again. So now, Radhika, the biggest upshot from the budget, from all of the commentary, is the talk about fiscal discipline.
Right.
But now that you've had some time to look at the numbers, can you tell us how they managed to be so disciplined in their fiscal numbers? How did they manage to bring the fiscal deficit to 5.8 where their target was 5.9?
Yeah, so the overall target was 5.9 for this financial year, but as per the revised estimates, the target is 5.8% of GDP.
Right.
One of the reason is, of course, the better performance of direct taxes, not so much of indirect taxes, but better performance of direct taxes. But on the expenditure side, if we see, there are two mixed trends. You know, revenue expenditure, they had to spend more than what they had budgeted.
Mostly subsidies.
Yes, mostly subsidies.
Right.
We can talk about that in detail. So revenue expenditure exceeded the target, but on capital expenditure, the target, as we know, was 10 lakh crore. But if we look at the revised estimates, it is somewhat less than that. It is around 50,000 crore lower than the budgeted target.
Okay.
So primarily the reduction in fiscal deficit that has been achieved is primarily on account of one, better performance of direct taxes, but more importantly, savings that the government has been able to do. And that saving is, that reduction in expenditure is on the capital account. So on capital expenditure, while the budgeted amount was 10 lakh crore, the actual amount that has been spent as per the revised estimates is lower than that. It is lower by 50,000 crore. So that is the main reason. And if we look at the why there was an underspending there
in capex.
One of the reason was that the scheme, which is, we know that a component of that 10 lakh crore is the scheme for capital assistance to states.
The 50-year interest-free loans.
Yes, the 50-year interest-free loans, which was budgeted at 1.3 lakh crore out of the 10 lakh crore. A part of that has not been taken up by the state. So that is one reason for the not the complete utilization of capital expenditure.
Right.
So there is a shortfall there. 26,000 crore has not been spent.
Okay.
So that is one reason, and the other is capital support to oil marketing companies was budgeted for this financial year. That has also been deferred to next financial year, that is FY25. So these are the two main reasons for the underspending on capital expenditure by 50,000 crore. But overall, if we see, the number is again good. If we talk about the other constituents like roads and railways, there the numbers are encouraging. It's mainly due to the fact that states have not been able to utilize the entire amount that was allocated for capital support to them. That is one major reason for the saving that we are seeing in the capital expenditure, and then overall getting reflected in the fiscal deficit numbers.
Right. Okay. So now you say that the revised estimates for this current year, the capex number is slightly lower.
Right.
So now the capex that they have projected they will spend in the next year, How much growth is that over the revised estimates, not what they budgeted?
Yeah, so the growth there is now 17% or 16.9% to be precise. Because what the FM mentioned in her speech was that there is an 11% increase over the budgeted estimate. So on 10 lakh crore, there is a 11% increase, which comes to 11.11 lakh crore. But given that the number is lower by 50,000 crore, the growth becomes higher because your base is lower. So growth expected, the growth projected over the revised estimates is 16.9%.
Do you feel this is a realistic target?
It is realistic. It is doable. One of the main thing is that, now that the states have been again given the 50-year interest-free loan, instead of borrowing from the market, they might prefer to take up this loan to do capital expenditure. Because we've seen last time, in this financial year, market borrowings by states have increased to a great extent, particularly this quarter. So now states do have an alternative to use this window for capital expenditure. Of course, there are these conditionalities involved that, you have to show that you are using it for capital expenditure.
Right, of course.
And there is a first sanction happens and then disbursement happens. All those things are there. But states do have an option to not rely too much on market borrowing and use this window. So if that is the case, I think the target is doable, or again, we'll be closer to that. So it's good to fix a target, but it's not that unrealistic as say, 37% increase over revised estimates. So there we see that the target is quite reasonable. It is ambitious, but it is doable.
Okay, and now coming to the other major expenditure, which is subsidy expenditure, what have the revised numbers for the current year shown, and what are they projecting for the next year?
Yeah, so if we look at the subsidies for the current year, the budgeted amount overall was 3.74 lakh crore. Okay, so and that is a sum of three main subsidies: food, fertilizer, and petroleum.
And fuel.
Now, now all these three the expenditure on all these three subsidies exceeded the budgeted target for different reasons. Food subsidy increased because we know that the free food grain scheme, which was earlier till December, has been extended by 5 years. So that means that we have to make allocation for the Jan to March period. So that will result in an increase in allocation for food subsidy. We also saw that the MSP, the minimum support price,
was hiked.
Were raised for different food grains during the course of this financial year. So that has resulted in increase in allocation for food subsidy. So food subsidy, we see an increase in allocation, increase in outlay. So that is one reason. The other, for petroleum subsidy, we have seen a big jump, because what was budgeted was somewhere around 2,000 crore. What we see in the revised estimate is 12,000 crore. So it's almost a 10,000 crore jump because of the subsidy that was provided to the Ujjwala scheme users, the subsidy that was provided.
And also, apart from Ujjwala, they expanded it to actually everybody, right?
To everybody, yes. So that has resulted in an increase in allocation for petroleum subsidy. And also fertilizers, we already know because of the increase in prices during the demand for grants, they increased the allocation for fertilizer subsidy. So for all the three components, we have seen an increase in allocation, and therefore the revised estimate of subsidy overall has crossed 4 lakh crore.
Wow.
That is the revised estimate for this financial year, that is FY24. Now, for the next financial year as well, the allocation is elevated, but not to the same extent. It is 3.87 lakh crore. So that is the amount that has been allocated under the budgeted estimate for FY25. Within this, of course, the main component is food subsidy, where more than half is food subsidy. More than 2 lakh crore is allocated for food subsidy. And that is, again, because of the extension of the free food grain scheme, and considering that there could be high food inflation and support has to be provided in the form of minimum support prices. So if we look at, compare the revised estimates of subsidy with the budget estimate of subsidies, we see that there is a decline from 4.1 lakh crore to 3.87 lakh crore. But it is still higher as compared to the budgeted estimate of the current year.
Of the current year.
Current year. So that is the picture emerging from subsidies, and that takes a major chunk of our revenue expenditure. So it's good to, it's important to analyze the major drivers of subsidy and the outlay that has been allocated for the various components.
Right. And now speaking about major components of revenue expenditure, the other major component from your article we can see seems to be interest payments, and that this is showing a worrying trend, at least the projection for next year. Could you tell us about that?
So interest payments is always, something to look out for, because if we look at one of the main components of deficit, one is fiscal deficit, one is revenue deficit, the other is primary deficit.
Right.
And what is primary deficit? It is the expenditure after excluding the interest payments. So it is the non-interest expenditure, the excess of non-interest expenditure over receipts. So that is your primary deficit, which is a very crucial indicator for assessment of debt sustainability. So we would want to have the interest payments, within limits, because if interest payments are higher, that will squeeze expenditure for other activities, maybe capital expenditure or productive other expenditures. Now, if we look at interest payments, first look at this financial year, comparing BE and RE of FY24, we see that there has been a encouraging amount of savings here, So there, what was budgeted, it is lower than that.
Okay.
But when we compare the revised estimates with the budgeted estimates for FY25, there is a big jump of almost 1.4 lakh crore in the interest payment, which makes it, in terms of share, interest payment has become 25% of the overall expenditure.
Revenue expenditure or total?
Overall, one fourth of the total expenditure.
Wow.
So that is a big number, because we need to curtail interest payments, which is one of the committed expenditure. What we need to see is what happens to interest rates, If the interest rates on borrowings become lower in the next financial year, maybe the interest outgo will be lower. Maybe that it could be, because that is what has happened this year. If there is one very important statement that comes out from the budget documents, which is the statement of deviations.
Yes.
Where we see they highlight some of the components where there is a major deviation between the budget estimate and the revised estimate. And they give the reason for that also. And one of the components there listed is interest payments for the current financial year, because what they had budgeted and what they had revised, there is a big difference, because revised estimates are lower. So interest rate was lower, so interest outgo was lower. But again, in the next financial year, they have targeted a higher amount. And it may well be that also comes to be lower in the revised estimate. So that is the picture on the interest payments.
Right. And now on, we've talked about expenditure, but about the money coming in, they've projected corporate and income tax both to grow 13% in the next financial year. Yes. Is this also an achievable target, you feel?
Yes. So if we look from the tax receipt side, the targets are set again quite... they are not ambitious, they are reasonable, they are broadly in line with the trend that we have been seeing over the last few years. And therefore, if you see gross tax revenue, growth has been projected at 11.5%.
Right.
If we look at net tax revenue, which is after we exclude the share that goes to states, the devolution of the tax amount that goes to states, the net tax revenue is projected at 11.9%. So we have been seeing that, the growth in taxes are projected at 10 to 11% overall. And there is variation amongst the various components. So we've seen that direct taxes have been doing better, and therefore they have projected direct taxes at a higher level.
But this is a 13% growth on an already high base, so it seems
still,
believable.
Yes. Because on the indirect taxes, they have projected a lower growth. 5%, 5.5%. So that is the growth for excise and customs, and we saw duty cuts happening in this financial year. So there we are seeing slower growth, but direct taxes are fine. I think they are broadly in line. There may be minor slippage, but overall they seem fine.
Okay.
And also when we express in terms of GDP, that is another metric, what is the tax to GDP ratio?
Right.
What is the direct tax to GDP ratio? We are seeing that they are broadly in line with what we have been seeing over the last 2-3 years. So it's 7.8%, 7.9% is the tax to GDP ratio in terms of net tax to GDP ratio. So they look fine there. The non-tax revenues.
Yes, I was going to ask about, you say, even disinvestment.
No, disinvestment is your non-debt capital
receipts, right?
So if we look at from the revenue side, we have the tax revenue and the non-tax revenue.
Right.
So if we look at the non-tax revenue, there they have again kept a higher amount based on buoyed by what they got in this financial year.
So that would be dividends.
That would be dividend. That would be the dividends and profits from RBI, from public sector entities, public sector banks, and there they have budgeted 1.5 lakh crore. So what we are seeing is that the share of non-tax revenue is picking up.
Is rising.
So again, the implicit assumption is that the RBI will again transfer a healthy amount of dividends to the government of India.
Right.
That is something to be seen. It may not be that high as we saw.
Because it needs to maintain its buffers as well.
They need to maintain their buffers, and there are a lot of things that go into their calculation of buffers, the provisioning that they have to make for different items, like for interest rate changes, the foreign exchange changes. So that's a different discussion altogether. But they are assuming that more than 1 lakh crore is again going to come from RBI and public sector banks as dividends. So it may or may not be. So that is something to be seen. But on tax revenues, the numbers look achievable.
Okay. And now coming to disinvestment, again, in your article, you pointed out that the 50,000 crore target that they've set for next year, even though it's lower than what they had said in last year's budget, it's still challenging, you're saying.
Challenging because, we have seen that they have been scaling down their budget estimates for disinvestment. So for last financial year, for this year, it was kept at 61,000 crore.
Right.
But if we look at the actual numbers, it's not even 20,000 crore as of now, the actual numbers. But the revised estimates have been pegged at 30,000 crore. And on top of that, again, there is a, 50,000 crore is the amount. So
for the next financial year.
So either there has to be a proper articulation of policy that, they are going ahead with disinvestment of their stakes in various public sector entities, which they did announce in the budget of the COVID and the budget speech after COVID, but they did not do anything about that. So either there is a shift in policy that, they become more enthusiastic about selling their stakes in the public sector entities. If that does not happen, then again, if there's just these minor sales, it looks challenging because we have not been able to achieve for this year, and all those disinvestment targets will shift to the next financial year. So that seems a bit challenging.
Right. And now there was a lot of talk that this budget actually didn't have any populist moves. And I guess the closest we can come to calling something a populist move in this budget would be the enhanced allocation for MG Narega and the enhanced allocation and widening of the housing scheme, PM Awas Yojana. But these were actually more necessary than being populist, right?
Right. They were necessary because we have seen that last year the government had steeply slashed the allocation for the Rural Jobs Guarantee Program from more than 1 lakh crore to 60,000 crore, and it came under sharp criticism that time. And this time also we have seen that they had to allocate more. So it's not that they have allocated more for the next financial year. They had to allocate more for this year as well.
For this current year,
So 60,000 crore, the revised estimates are 86,000 crore.
Right.
So it is good that they have maintained that 86,000 crore allocation for the next financial year as well. So it's not that, after realizing that they have to increase again, they have slashed in the next financial year. They haven't done so.
Which means that they feel the base demand for Narega, they feel is going to be at least that much.
Yes. So, and that is the estimate that, if we look at some of the people who have worked on this field, they do see that at least 90,000 crore has to be allocated for Manrega. So it's a reasonable number. There could be some upshot to this also. There could be some, some allocation, but it looks reasonable, and it's a welcome decision that they have allocated more than 26,000 crore as compared to the budgeted estimate of this financial year to the Rural Jobs Guarantee Scheme. Because if we look at the data, we see that the demand for work under MG Narega remains elevated. It's not that it's gone down. People do need work under this scheme. So it's good that they have allocated that much amount there.
And same, the push for the construction sector and employment through Awas.
Yeah, that is actually a good thing, and it tallies well with their support to CapEx also.
Right.
Because there we are seeing that, because of the continued support to CapEx, the industries like steel, cement, they're doing well. We are seeing a sustained increase in steel consumption and all the ancillary industries that are linked to the infra push strategy of the government. And here it actually, the push towards housing serves as a two-pronged measure. On the one side, it gives support to the lower middle income segment who do not have houses or who are staying in illegal or chawls. So they are giving support, and at the same time, there is also a push to employment generation, not only to those who are getting involved, but also again to the other sectors who have backward linkages with the housing sector. So that way, it is a good scheme. This push is good for a number of reasons, for providing support as well as providing employment generation.
Right. And now coming to a few audience questions, we have a question from Nagarjuna, which is that will the budget include any tax cuts? Now, I can answer this for you. The budget did not include any tax cuts. The FM was quite categorical. She said this is an interim budget and it's not going to have any sort of tax cuts. If you want to see any tax cuts, then I think you'll have to wait for July when the full budget is presented. Sankalp has a question, which is that he asks, don't you think that enhanced allocations for schemes like PM Kisan is a more efficient approach than increasing subsidies? Or he asks, are there market distorting factors or collusion that makes it necessary to go for subsidies?
So I think there is a slight difference between, both are in the realm of subsidies. If you look from the international literature, if we look what the US would say, US would also say that PM Kisan is also a subsidy. This is a subsidy of a different kind where you are providing income support. Any kind of income support is also a subsidy. So that is income support, whereas the other subsidy that we call here subsidy is mostly a price support mechanism. Even when we are providing minimum support prices, when we are increasing minimum support prices, that is also a kind of a subsidy. So subsidy has a wider meaning, especially in the Indian context, and there are various instruments through which subsidies or support is being provided. So they are necessary. For example, fertilizer subsidy that was needed because there was an increase in prices because of global headwinds. We saw increase in the input prices of fertilizer. So that was needed, and to some extent, yes, there is some element of populism, especially during Raksha Bandhan. The petroleum subsidies were hiked when the cylinder subsidies were given. So it's not just that they are waiting for budget, they give during the course of the year as well. But some subsidies were needed to provide a support, especially for agriculture, for farmers, given that, the GVA is the gross value addition in agriculture has been subdued due to a number of factors. So this kind of support is needed at least for some time till agriculture recovers and there is less of a adverse impact from global headwinds happening. But if we look at subsidies, according to this government, we see that subsidy as a share of GDP is gradually coming down.
It is coming down.
It's coming down. So it's not that the government is going they are spending a lot on subsidies. Wherever a need arises, which is an absolute necessity, given the global challenges, then subsidy allocation has to be increased.
Right. Okay. So there you go. a deeper look at the budget shows how they have managed to be fiscally disciplined. Most of it is because capital expenditure in this current year has come in lower than what they had budgeted. But at the same time, their subsidy expenditure increased. It was higher than what they had budgeted. The balance has been bridged because direct tax collections have been stronger. In the upcoming year, there are a few concerning points, such as interest payments now projected to form 1/4 of all expenditure, which is a very large amount to tie up in something like interest payments. Tax revenue is going to again see healthy growth, which is a great thing. Now, of course, we need to see what's going to happen, how subsidy expenditure in the next year will play out. But overall, it looks like a disciplined budget. It looks like they have kept to the course of fiscal consolidation. Now we'll have to wait till July to see the full year's budget to see actually what the new government plans. But on that note, that's all from us. Thank you so much for watching.